morning. Good morning, Senator. We wanted to start off today talking about the weather a little bit because it's a bit chilly and snowing where in my parts. So far, I still have power, thankfully, but I don't know if that will continue. How are you doing, Senator?
We're doing fine. You know, we had some very heavy snow. It was only like 8 or 9 inches, but it because most of it was sleet. It's kind of settled like blocks of ice, and it was very hard to remove. And so that's going to sit there for a long time, just because it's not soft, fluffy snow that melts easily. Well,
Oh yeah, it's fluffy snow right now. It's been snowing all morning. It's really beautiful in North Carolina, where I'm from. We haven't had snow like this in years, so it's really pretty. But I know up north, we have some friends like in New York and stuff. They're not far into the snow, and they're getting a lot of snow right now. So.
yeah, I think I had heard that this is the biggest winter storm in North Carolina in 40 years.
There was one when let's see, I believe it was like 2014. I was really young, but yeah, it was kind of a snowstorm and ice storm. Took out a lot of power. My family, we have diners, and so we always keep the diners open.
Oh,
And that particular year, it was a insane story. We were the only place that was open, and everyone's power was out, so they were going to the diner, and it was the only warm place. And we ran out of food, everything. We finally ran out of coffee, and it was a pure mutiny. All the customers were all upset. But it's a fun time. But yeah, I'll be, we have all the diners open right now, and
I love diners because when I worked, I was a utility boy in a factory in Webster, Massachusetts. During my first year in college, it was a summer job, and I would clock into the factory, go in, I'd work a full shift, and then everybody would be leaving for the night, and I would get out and I would walk up the street to the diner. It was just sort of an old-fashioned, real life diner, and I'd get a good, solid, inexpensive meal, and then I'd go back down and I'd clock in and I'd work another complete shift, but I'd be the only one in the factory. So I lived on the diner food, and it was great.
Yeah, well, it's American staple. I know that, we wanted to bring some levity into the conversation, starting it off with, the weather, and I extend to everyone who's watching, stay safe out there, take all the needed precautions. But I know that we have some updates abroad. Speaking about Iran, can you give us an update, Senator?
Yeah, we've followed the situation in Iran pretty closely, and you never know with President Trump whether he's bluffing, whether he hasn't made up his mind, or what's happening. But he has an enormous, what he calls an armada, gathering over in the Middle East, focused on Iran. And until today, I hadn't seen anything that gave really some sort of reasonable insight into what was going to happen. But the BBC overnight ran an article entitled "Israel Eyes Regime Change in Iran and is Counting on Trump to Make It Happen," which, of course, Israel is the puppeteer. They call the tune, we dance to the tune. And then the discussion says that amid all of the global speculation about the buildup in the Middle East, Israel's leaders have remained unusually silent. Now, what that tells me, they're silent because if things don't work out well, they want it to be on us. they don't want to share, and it's like, oh, we didn't know what was going on here. And so they're unusually silent. And it says Israel's prime ministers had little to say publicly about the United States taking on his biggest enemy. And there's a fellow, Danny Citrinowicz, senior Iran researcher at Israel's Institute for National Security Studies. And he says, it shows you the importance of Netanyahu, the importance that Netanyahu puts on this moment. I guess he's talking about Israel's kind of self-control, the way that they're playing this out. And then he goes on, and this is important. He says, for Netanyahu, being in this position where the U.S. has so many forces in the Gulf, being so close to Trump attacking Iran, this is for him a golden moment in time that he cannot forego. Now, in a sense, this is sort of the crowning glory for Benjamin Netanyahu. He has carried out a Holocaust in Gaza, just exterminating people wholesale. He has invaded Lebanon, attacked, Israel has attacked Lebanon multiple times since the country first was founded. And they've always had their eyes on expanding and swallowing up territory in Lebanon. And so, he's just, Netanyahu has orchestrated wars in Iraq, in Libya, in Syria, everywhere. And of the 7 countries that the United States planned on overthrowing on behalf of Israel back in 2001, all of them have been taken down except for Iran. And Iran on the list was the last one. The plan was to take them all down in 5 years. It didn't work because the people resisted, the people rose up, they fought back. But so here we are now. And so it looks like we're very close. Now, here's something else that I found very relevant to the question of are we going or are we not? The Saudi Arabians very vocally came out in opposition to the United States attacking Iran. Did that a couple of weeks ago. And suddenly, overnight, the Saudi defense minister, who clearly does not speak on his own, because if you defy the crown prince, your head is not long attached to your body. So he speaks for the crown prince. And he said now he's completely changed the Saudi position. And he says Iran would be emboldened if the U.S. didn't attack them after this big military buildup. It's a total reversal of the Saudi position overnight. And the speculation is that it's because they now know that the United States is going to attack Iran, and they don't want to be on the opposite side from the United States. Mm-hmm. So those are pretty strong indicators. We can always hope and pray for the sake of our people, but especially for the sake of the Iranians who will pay the price in blood. Mm-hmm. We'll do a big hoopla about, well, we've got all these protesters. We got to save the protesters, and of course we're going to kill people. We're going to slaughter people in enormous numbers if we actually do this. Mm-hmm. We can only hope that that there'll be an attempt to limit the scope of it to some extent. The last thing in the world that we want is to to get boots on the ground and get drawn into this thing to where we have body bags coming back to the United States. They ought to stamp each one of them with the Star of David, because it's not being done for the United States. We have no interest whatsoever, not the slightest interest, in attacking Iran. It is solely being done because of the people who control the finances for the midterm election. And I just, anyway, I feel very sad for the people of Iran. On both the protesters, who many protesters were sincere about
the economic reasons, the sanctions that kind of gave them legitimate hardship that they were protesting. We had spoken about this a few weeks ago on kind of the blatant hubris of some of our leaders, as well as Israel, coming out and kind of doing this provocative stance of not only saying that they support the protests, but they're there on the ground. They're referring to like the Israeli intelligence facade. We've later learned that some of the weapons that have been recovered from the protesters, which they were provocateurs and very violent, some of them, not all, there was the very legitimate protest in the beginning, were armed with Israeli weapons. It's coming out to
I hadn't that.
So they're confiscating these weapons, and they're coming from Israel. Then you also have the Starlink, very reminiscent of kind of the overthrow of Ukraine 2014. That kind of, way that we like to seek out change in that way, where we kind of boost protests and then incite them to be violent in some sections. So it seems there was a lot of similarities there. And on the Israel front, I know that there is this suspected ceasefire, even though Israel is not really abiding by its terms of allowing aid in. But news broke that last night they've started bombing in Khan Yunis again. And as of the reports, I believe it's like upwards of 20 people who have been killed. Of course, they have been bombing nonstop, not as frequently as they had been. I think a few weeks ago you had 3 journalists who were murdered in a airstrike that had targeted their vehicle, and one of the journalists was actually a CBS reporter. And he had actually just been married, and it was a very tragic story. But on that front, just an update on what's going on with Israel and Palestine is, we can't forget what's happening, and kind of the it's definitely not as accelerated pace as we had seen of the killing of the Palestinians, but it is still occurring, and then Israel is not abiding by its terms in the ceasefire agreement. So I thought I'd kind of give an update on that as well.
Just to add to that, people need to understand that this Holocaust, this genocide, it doesn't stop with the peace treaty or with the cessation of bombing, which even the bombings haven't really stopped. They continue at a lower pace. But the idea, I think, from the outset, the idea of Israel has been, we will destroy all means of sustaining human life. We will use those 2,000 pound Biden bombs that destroyed all of the apartment complexes, so that there would be no place for people to get out of the blazing sun or the freezing cold. And we will destroy every hospital very systematically, so that there is no place for people to obtain treatment for wounds or sicknesses. And we'll limit the amount of food that comes in, so that people are always struggling just to sustain life. And the idea is that that initial onslaught, this horrific destruction of everything, the purpose of it is to lead to the death of the people who remain in place.
Mm-hmm.
You have all this cavalier talk about how we're going to create the Riviera on the Mediterranean, where we'll build all these beautiful hotels and things. We'll make it really spectacular, and then we'll have all these Israeli entrepreneurs who can take off. Now, remember, there are no Jewish citizens in Gaza. Zero. The population is 99% Sunni Muslim, 1% Christian. And so the idea is that we just simply annihilate every vestige of humanity there, and then we will rebuild on the graves of the people, and we'll create this big wonderland where people can make lots of profits.
Yeah.
So
on that front, I think you made a very important point where the bombs is just a one step in this this escalated rate of Holocaust. Just for pure mental health of the IDF soldiers, you can't completely annihilate a population of 2 million people in a violent manner. You have to also take other measures of them freezing to death, disease, starvation. Those are also happening. And I think it's important to note, I do some work with a great group called Doctors Against Genocide, and they bring a lot of information to light. Gaza no longer has any more albuterol, which is an asthma medicine. So some of the doctors are raising alarms on that. But they've also raised alarms on the fact that for 2 winters now, there has been over 60,000 mobile homes that are right at the border, and Israel's not letting them in. So that just, there's no real reason why they won't, why they shouldn't let it in. But it just kind of goes to show kind of the depravity of the lengths that they are willing to put the Palestinians through to try and get them to leave that land, forcing them to live in tents in the winter when, they can literally see, mobile homes that are already paid for. They're just right at the border waiting. It's very disheartening to see that my government is not pushing the hand of Israel to be better and uphold the law. But I know that was kind of a tidbit that we weren't going to get into. Our main topic today is something locally, what's happening domestically, I should say, is ICE. I'm going to go ahead and put this graphic on the screen. Where next on ICE? Senator, do you want to take this and kind of give people an update? And I think you wanted to kind of refer to this opinion piece in the Washington Post, about what the real voters kind of want in some of the deportations and what they see the Trump administration doing.
Yeah, the ICE activities in Minnesota and in some other places have become an important political issue. And you have a situation Minnesota is kind of an unusual place. It's the riots that burst out after the George Floyd death occurred just like a mile away from where some of these protests have been taking place now. There's kind of an anarchistic nature to Minnesota. You had Minnesota Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan encouraging people to put their body on the line to resist the ICE arrests, the activities. So there's sort of an encouragement towards violence, and what's happened, you have these ICE agents who are out there. They're constantly hounded, harassed. They're, you know, people blowing these rape whistles that, you know, just blast your ears out. And, uh, and then you have political people who are encouraging people to just push right up to the very limit. And anytime that people are brought into a situation of extreme confrontation, it's very easy for something to go wrong. And I was just looking this morning at the, you know, potential offenses up there. You have the offense of assaulting, resisting, or impeding under the United States Code, and this is the most common charge for physical interference with law enforcement. And the defendant, the government just proves that the defendant forcibly resisted, opposed, impeded, or interfered with a federal officer performing his duties. Well, if there is physical contact during this interference, the penalty, it becomes a felony, and the penalty is up to 8 years in prison. So you have a lot of these protesters. It's one thing, you know, you can protest. There's no problem with anyone protesting against ICE or anything else, but you can't physically interfere with an officer. And if you do, that's a felonious assault under 18 U.S. Code 111. And but you have such a kind of a breakdown of law and order in that area that the court systems don't function normally. The state government doesn't function quite normally. And so it's a mess, but at the same time, you have concerns by the public that that some of the ICE activities have gone too far, and so there's some comments by Joe Rogan where he said, you know, I don't believe the guy should have been shot, talking about this Preddy.
Mm-hmm.
And but he said it's a lot more nuanced than this. He said, you know, the ICE officers are being harassed by people who are calling for violence, which put the officers on red alert. And I think certainly, you know, Preddy had attacked officers before. He kicked and smashed a tail light, and he's walking around with a firearm on his hip. Now, the law says that you can carry concealed, and presumably in Minnesota there's also an open carry of some sort.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And so that's okay. But when your sole purpose is to go out and protest against federal law enforcement officers, so the only people on the opposite side from you are federal law enforcement officers, not a crowd of opposing people. There's something a little bit unnerving about somebody who takes a loaded pistol to confront federal officers, and then who does it in a very clearly criminal fashion, where, you know, he was photographed, you know, just out of control, just violent, spitting on officers, kicking, smashing the lights on their car as they're leaving. They're leaving already, and he's chasing them, and he's, you know, so I think this guy was an accident waiting to happen. And he's being encouraged then by Governor Waltz and by Lieutenant Governor and various people to, get in their face and this kind of thing. And so you have this incident where the officers they're not even focused on him. They're trying to get control of a woman that's there, and he intervenes. He inserts himself physically, and the next thing they're rustling, and there's this firearm, and anyway, shots are fired. Apparently, they may have had the gun before the shots are fired, but you have a whole lot of people who are piling on, trying to bring this very, very violent guy under control, and something happened. And it's always easy when you're dealing with law enforcement to sit back and have a sip of your beer and contemplate, well, he could have done this, or this could have been done differently. But it's very easy to forget that law enforcement officers are human beings who are influenced by their fear at the moment, their emotions. The closer you get to that limit, the easier it is. People can very easily make errors in judgment, and I think that's what we're seeing in these cases. But
Yeah.
the problem is a political problem, among other things.
Yeah, I think one issue that I find very unsettling is the amount of influx of ICE agents that since last year, from this administration's push to have higher numbers. In 2025, we recruited up to 10,000 ICE agents to the field, and they were trained only 6 weeks. The normal time was double that. And some of the classes that they cut were de-escalation and Spanish. I think we should emphasize on the de-escalation, because I think that is kind of what would have stopped both of these instances, which I'm referring to as this Peretti individual and Renee Good, where you have citizens, they're being provocative and they're committing crimes that is one thing. But for my personal standard is if you are given a badge and a gun by the state, you have to have a higher standard of discipline, discernment, and be able to, at every step of the way, not use lethal force unless it is absolutely necessary. That's kind of my thing, is that the onus is on, if you have the ability to, uphold the law, that's your role, you've taken the badge and the duty, it also comes with the responsibility. And I think that is kind of a lot of what you're seeing in this palpable disdain for the operations of ICE, is that we are viewing these images and these videos where you have ICE agents that are using unnecessary force when there's no immediate threat to their life. I'm not particularly talking about Peretti's case or Renee Good's case. I'm talking about, there's multiple other videos that have kind of gone viral in different formats. And I think that is why you have this very palpable and disdain for some of these actions. And that kind of leaves room for people to be whipped up into a kind of a frenzy, which you see in like Minnesota. So I think that is something that needs to be addressed. And I think, you even have that in right-leaning news agency, where news sources like podcasters and stuff that were kind of for that. They're kind of saying, I don't really like the way this optically looks. It's, and it's a lot about optics as well. Another thing, we have a question from one of the viewers is, what we have in the news lately is ICE is now using administrative warrants to enter homes for people who are on the final order removal. This question is that I'll just quote it. What about the reliance of ICE on non-judicial warrants to justify forcible entry into homes? What would you kind of respond to with that, Senator?
I'm very aware of it. I can't say that I am able to sort of give you a legal analysis. I do know that ICE, because of the nature of their duties, has authority that you normally would not have with if you're just dealing with American citizens, and so I think it's something that is a little bit untested at this point. The administrative warrants are signed by the administrative law judges that adjudicate cases involving asylum and this sort of thing. And so you do have that adjudication. You have a final determination that the individual will be deported. I'm just not sure whether those warrants have been thoroughly examined by federal courts, and I can't really tell you what the outcome would be. But there has been a judicial determination, but not by an Article 3 judge. It's by an I guess it's an Article 2 judge, an executive branch judge. And so that is an issue, though. That is an issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that, Senator. I think it's also important to note Border Patrol has had this authority for quite some time now, primarily on the Mexican and United States border. It has been said that the Border Patrol, if they have not even a reasonable probable cause, they can confiscate and also do warrantless entries into homes. So that's kind of it's already been enacted primarily in the border, but it is kind of extending into the United States, which I find kind of an interesting little tidbit to make known to people that, a lot of the dissent is that people are having with, the ICE operations. People view it as it's like solely attached to the Trump administration. But these, their operations have been going on all the way back, prior to, comes out of, the Patriot Act, 9/11, the war on terror, all that. That's what kind of birthed the ICE and disbanded the INS. It's been continually happening. I think that's kind of important to note as well. There's one investigative journalist, her name is Ellen Jemerson. She kind of goes into a lot of the, how do I put it? The due process infringements that have been going on all the way to the Bill Clinton era, his administration, concerning people who are seeking asylum or who are trying to get their citizenship here, which it gives a broader picture of kind of what's been going on. A lot of Trump was hounded for his first administration for putting children in cages, but that kind of came from Obama. Those establishments were built under Obama. I think that's kind of important to add to the conversation that it is. These administrations are continuing these processes. It's not something that's completely only birthed out of the Trump administration. Is kind of what I kind of want to get to.
It's interesting with asylum. Asylum. There was no right to asylum before World War II, and in the aftermath of World War II, there was tremendous movement of people from here to there, and especially with the Jewish migration into Palestine to take over that country. The United Nations, came up with a treaty that said people had a right to asylum and that, under certain conditions. Well, anyway, I think one of the problems that we have is this notion of the right to asylum. Uh, the right to asylum is a gross infringement on the sovereignty of nations. And the problem with it, the problem was not so much where you had somebody who was fleeing from imminent danger. The problem was that for every person who genuinely was fleeing from imminent danger, there were probably 100 or maybe 1,000 people who wanted to go somewhere where they could get a job paying a higher rate of pay. And so you have this kind of artificial system that is designed to admit that tiny, minuscule number of people who are actually fleeing danger. And and then you've got this legal industry of training people how to lie so that they can get through and they can get asylum.
Mm-hmm.
The whole system is so utterly corrupt that what we really should do is to say, look, there is no right to asylum. We're pulling out of any treaties to that effect. And then we will decide, we will decide. Probably the president of the United States will occasionally say, in this situation, we do have these people that we are going to admit under certain circumstances. But we set the rules. And we don't have foreigners setting the rules for how the United States can conduct its sovereign affairs. And this is not just a problem with the United States, but all through Europe, all over the world, particularly in the Western world. This has become it's just so monumentally corrupted. What started off as sort of, this would be a nice thing to do. It's just become a system utterly corrupt, and it's just made the borders unmanageable. So hopefully, but let's, if we could just get to the 3 recommendations that were made by the fellow who wrote the article.
Yeah, let's pivot back to the article a little bit. Do you want to go into kind of what the article's essence was, and then kind of go into the 3 points?
Yes, I thought his recommendations were pretty good. He's a CNN commentator. Brad Todd is his name. He's a Republican campaign strategist, so he's not unbiased, but presumably he is a little bit in the middle if he's on CNN. And so his first recommendation was respect the asylum process. Now, I agree with him, despite the fact that I don't think we should have asylum. As long as we do have asylum, I don't have a problem with him saying respect the asylum process, adjudicate the asylum cases quickly. Now, I think that's one thing that we could improve on. We really need to hire additional immigration judges more rapidly so that we can work down the backlog of asylum applications. And he said most of them will fail, but there'll be a few of them that don't. And I think that's a reasonable approach.
Mm-hmm.
And now the more important one is the second one, which says deprioritize the deportation of nonviolent citizens. And I think this is where so much of the unease is. It's about what do you do with people, especially people who have lived for a long time in the country. Yeah, they got here illegally. Yes, they're unlawfully here, but they've got roots in the community. And what do you think about that?
No, I agree. I think a lot of I think you have a considerable amount of the American population who has been demanding, or at least calling for, some reform in our immigration process. We have a backlog of 11 million people who are trying to get into the country legally, and they have a process of waiting, upwards of like 5 to 10 years. Um, that's not the case for other countries. Other countries, they either approve you or deny you, but they don't kind of keep you, dangling there for all that time. Another thing that I've heard that people would like to have reform is, if you're here, not here legally, you are sent back to you're repatriated to your country, you have a time that you have to wait 10 years before you can come back into the country. Now, I know that that affects some people who have come here, have children, have family here who are citizens. It really kind of breaks up that family unit, which I think is something that we can look at and empathize with and address it kind of in a humane manner. Should they really wait that long? Can their case be heard? I think these are legitimate, reasonable arguments that people are having. I think in that article, it made it a point that upwards to 80% of the people who are being deported right now have no violent record. I don't think that you had any disagreement from people when you were kind of saying, okay, we're going after the violent criminals. Yes, that's understandable, and that's we agree with that. But if the data shows that you are primarily going after people who don't have any criminal records, then that kind of creates that sense where we have this very volatile thing that's happened in Minnesota, it's happening in LA, all of these kind of primarily democratic areas, that it foments all that. I think that is something that you can point to, and it creates an anger in people, and then we could do a lot to dispel that in that sense.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he does in his article. Brad Todd points out that in the red states, where local officials cooperate with immigration enforcement, there hasn't been this violent chaos taking place, and that in these other places, you have the local officials who are encouraging violence and telling people, put your body on the line. Well, that's inciting violence.
It's irresponsible. Yeah, it's very irresponsible.
Inciting violence, and you're obviously you're talking about hurting ICE agents physically when you make that assertion, and you're also, for what it's worth, you're endangering the lives of the protesters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. It is kind of a very irresponsible thing. And I had a discussion with a former cop from Atlanta. He's kind of had this career in de-escalation methods, and that's kind of what his big quarrel was with some of these cities that weren't allowing, that kind of were impeding the local law enforcement to work with ICE. So he says that it probably would have saved both Renee Good and Alex Peretti if you had local law enforcement who, there's a reason that the local law enforcement, they are better at de-escalation because they're part of the community. They know they go to, your kids go to school with their kids. They have this sense of not othering, whereas kind of ICE agents are very detached from the community. So you kind of have this confrontation that can happen where they're fed up, they get very volatile. We saw that with the Renee Good thing where they're screaming at her, get out of the car, get out of the effing car. That could have been easily de-escalated if you had someone who knew her, was like, what are you doing? Let's pull your car to the side. I understand that you object to this, and just kind of very person to person. I think that is kind of when you have the ICE agents who are not a part of the community, it's very easy for them to be very tunnel visioned, and this is my job. Then it's easy for them, the protesters, get under their skin. So I agree with you in that sense that some of not allowing local law enforcement to work with ICE is not beneficial to the population, because I don't want to see people getting killed. And
no, sure. Well, and the third recommendation by this Brad Todd was that the federal government, the president should really crack down and use the full discretionary power of the federal agencies to stop this hostility towards immigration enforcement. And specifically, he's talking about use the leverage of transportation grants, housing projects, and all of the federal government things that the jurisdictions want to provide some leverage, because he says that the blue jurisdictions have no justification to protect criminals and to gum up legitimate law enforcement by the federal government. And so I think it is interesting that all of a sudden Governor Walz has gone silent. I don't know what he was told, but apparently something persuasive. So, and there's no doubt that when the public officials stop calling for violence, the chances that somebody is going to get killed diminish enormously. So those people are certainly not doing America any good by what they're doing. But it is a challenging situation, and
yes. Now I know I do want to before we do kind of concluding statements, we did get another question. Give your answer to it. It's if an ICE officer demanded that you produce something to confirm your citizenship, would you be obligated to provide it? What's your take on that?
I honestly don't know. I think the normal reaction would be, yeah, okay, here it is. But that's different from whether the law requires it. I doubt that the law requires you to identify. Well, it requires you to identify yourself as who you are. I believe that's fairly clear, but I don't know beyond that citizenship status, where you are sort of being required to affirmatively establish something. I doubt that is a requirement, but don't count on this, because I have not researched that specifically. I couldn't tell you with certainty. Most people deal with law enforcement in a common sense way. I remember, when I was in the Senate, excuse me just one second here. Okay. When I was in the Senate, I was pulled over coming out of Richmond. I'm not sure that I should have been, but the officer pulled me over, and by law, you coming and going from the legislative session, you're immune. And I did not say, "Oh, I'm immune, you can't do this." I just said, "Yes, officer." He said, "Well," he said, "you were doing this or that." I said, "Okay, thank you very much." And then I went on my way. There's no need to confront law enforcement officers. So, but I think with that, we probably better wrap it up.
Yeah, we did kind of overextend the time, and maybe we can have another discussion, kind of on the ICE's ability to demand that you kind of prove that you're a citizen. Excuse me. I think that is something that we can probably make an entire show out of, kind of thing. But thank you, Senator, for giving us your insights. We covered a lot of topics today, and I want to encourage everybody to tune in next week to focus on the news. Thank you, Senator.
Okay.